Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Welcome to the Print's page turner. Today we're here speaking to Mridula Ramesh, who has written about one of the most important crises that our Earth is facing right now, but isn't talked about too much, which is the water crisis. And the book we're going to discuss today is Watershed. So welcome to the Print.
Thank you, Simran, and thank you for having me here.
So one of the first questions I want to ask is about something that's very topical. So today, you have the central government initiating, the repeal of the 3 farm laws. I want to know from you what effect this will have on our water.
Okay, I'm really glad you brought that up because I think the farm laws, its passage and its repeal is a wonderful exemplar of how policies that sometimes look to build up resilience have to navigate the democratic realities of India today. One thing that keeps coming to mind is what Dr. M.S. Swaminathan told me, and it's an important enough statement that I've used it in my first book and the second book. And he said, one of the best ways of learning, of communication is farmer to farmer learning, farmer to farmer persuasion. And it's sadly one of the least used. So one of the case studies I talk in the book, which was successful in farmers growing sugarcane to save water and to come up with practices that save water and to spread it across farmers, is getting one farmer who's progressive and then using that farmer to convince the others to show and tell. That works out to being very effective. And why I think your question is so important is what are we trying to do? Why are we trying to build resilience here? We are trying to change what India grows and what India is, right? If you look, something I've said again and again in my book is we were a nation of about 220 million eating mostly millets. Mm-hmm. And thanks to a colonial set of changes, and the need to become food secure, the Green Revolution, and subsequent changes since then, we are now today a 1.3 billion country eating primarily rice and wheat, right? And the price for this transformation has come largely from the groundwater of India's dry northwest. Let's just look at the challenge we're trying to solve. We're trying to grow rice, not to mention wheat. Rice takes about 1,240 millimeters of rain in a region that gets between 500 to 700 millimeters of rain a year, right? And that gap between 1,240 plus wheat and the local rainfall is largely met through groundwater, right? And many places in the dry northwest are sort of overdrawing their annual groundwater more than 2 times. And as per a high-level state committee in Punjab, they say, look, the groundwater may run out by about, actually, I think they say will run out, but 20 to 25 years. Right. And there is a question that people should be, needs to be asked that says, what does the next generation do? If the groundwater runs out, what will the next generation of farmers in the dry northwest do? What will they grow? Mm-hmm. And how will they grow it? Right? It's a sort of frightening question, and there are no easy answers because, we've come to this step by step, right? It's the Green Revolution, and every step of the way we've come to this step by step. The subsoil, so it's not going to be an easy ship to turn. Mm-hmm. And I think this particular episode over the last year has demonstrated that, right? And it's not going to be an easy ship to turn. And that's why in the book, again and again, the focus of the book just says, decentralized solutions are more likely to work, right? We need everyone to push. It's very comforting to blame, political leaders, state, local, whatever, national. It's very comforting. But if you want to get stuff done, it's better to focus on decentralized local solutions where the individual starts by taking a greater role.
Yeah, that's another thing I wanted to ask you about. Now, given these laws are going to be repealed, what are other ways in which we can better regulate water in the agriculture sector, which you say in your book is 70% consumer of our water?
Okay. So I'm smiling because it's not going to be easy, right? So, but I think, we've put the cart in front of the horse in a sense, right? And one of the case studies I mentioned in the book is how did India start increasing its egg demand? It ran a very, very innovative campaign in the 80s, right? It was a very catchy jingle, and then it was backed up by people making egg recipes and bus stands and handing out recipe booklets. And it convinced even people who are vegetarians, saying, look, it makes your kids smarter. So it convinced them to try it out. So I think we get demand right? Once, like, even if you say, okay, farmers, please grow these millets, you're going to the people who are buying from or getting their rice and wheat from the ration shop are going to say, I don't want to eat this. This is very uncool, right? And the hipsters get that millets are nutritious and tasty and everything else, but we need the masses to buy it. So I think we need to start with demand, again, education, that sort of thing, and then move into what farmers buy. But very interesting thing, right? Like, you asked me what are the ways you can change. And right now there is a startup that's working in Punjab. So this startup is working with an NGO. So I always find this combination works very well because you need someone local to handhold, convince, persuade, all of those things. And then what the startup is telling, I think they're now up to 3,000 plus Punjabi farmers. So it's a significant number, saying, look, if you save water and you grow things responsibly, we can get you a premium because we can give you a sustainability brand, right? And they're getting farmers to buy it. So I think, starting that way, you might actually see progress in building up resilience in a way that moves the needle slowly, but hopefully in the right direction.
So speaking of building resilience, another thing that you say in the book is that a better tool to improve resilience is to support farmers through PM Kisan, Raitu Bandhu, those kinds of schemes, as opposed to MSP. Why do you say that? Also, because there have been reports of these schemes not being implemented not being implemented as well.
Well, both schemes, both MSP and this is not implemented well. So it's a question of which is the better of two things. My data suggests that a direct benefit transfer is more efficient and reaches the people more directly. Again, MSP is an important point, and I think a lot of people have weighed in on this. MSP was a tool created, it's a creature of drought, right? It was created at a time when India was food insecure, but water secure, right? To use it today when we are water insecure and say, I will keep my MSP for water hungry crops. And I will introduce a MSP for, say, water friendly crops. And the hope is to get farmers to shift. I'm not entirely sure how effective that's going to be, simply because MSP only matters as much as the procurement machinery behind it. Right? The procurement machinery, Punjab and Haryana are the gleaming success symbols, right? I mean, to some extent, you can understand the frustration because they said, look, we've done everything right. And it's thanks to us, you guys are food secure. So why are you now coming against us? And, I think there's a debt of gratitude the nation owes. But the question is how, and this is something I've heard from farmers in Punjab there who said, why would we try anything else when this is so easy and it gets sold in a minute and the cash is assured, right? So I think if you do MSP for all, it's going to make it harder to get the farm ship to turn because the demand of the procurement machinery exists for two crops. And it's not necessarily clear whether we have the financial wherewithal to develop it for other crops.
You very interestingly sort of trace the history of our water usage. What has been the greatest? You talk at length also about British intervention and various infrastructural changes that they brought with them that changed our landscape forever. Can you kind of talk a little bit about that, the impact of that, and how it's still impacting us today?
Sure. So the point, the British influenced water in many ways. I'll talk about philosophy because everything begins with philosophy, and it's the most important change. So the British, we've gone through many times how variable India's water is, right? And all through our history, whether you look at the Indus Valley civilization, whether you look at evidence from the different ancient cities of India, you see this respect for water, right? Indus farmers grew crops that were in keeping with their local water availability, and Indus farmers changed what they grew as the water availability in their sites changed. And that I've gone into depth on how that worked in the book. But when the British came, they said, you know what? Local water availability doesn't matter. You can grow what you want in a place, and we can use canals to bring water in, and we can link, we can bring water in, and don't worry about transport because we can build railways to cart it out, right? And when you look at the Punjab, the canal colonies, I'm talking about undivided Punjab, and the canal colonies were seen as a feat of marvelous water engineering because it allowed for this great agricultural revolution to take place in a place that was almost desert earlier, right? But that was the spin. What underlay the spin was a fantastic return on British capital, right? So C.S. Buck, a British administrator, writes, it provided 23.5% return, the Chenab Canal. And that was it. That was the intent, right? And there was also an intent to centrally control, because once you get rid of forests and you've got rid of all the tank economy that existed in those places and supported the agriculture, you're now entirely bereft of your defenses, and you're fully dependent on a centralized control, which coincidentally the British held. Right, so it was the philosophy became very different. So again and again, you see that, right? Even in Madurai, tank economies were decentralized, community managed. The tank provided multiple benefits to its communities. There were caste angles to it, and we've seen it in our studies. But the cash flow was a little more equitable in things like fishing, right? So I think the biggest message of the British was that geographic variability of India's water didn't matter, and a more centralized control. The other very interesting aspect of the legacy of the British, which again continues to this day, is the kind of water engineering they've left us. Again, this stems from the philosophy, right? So you have to go the philosophy first, water engineering next. Again, if you look at, I've spoken about the Kallanai, which is this anicut in Tamil Nadu. And the ancient Kallanai actually respected the facets of water and respected the sedimentation processes of branching rivers. Our dams don't do that, right? And they're like, well, we don't really care about the facets of India's water. And that, again, is the thing. It's not, don't get me wrong. I think technology can be a powerful tool, but whatever technology we use needs to respect the facets of water. And I think the British didn't get that, probably because they came from a very different water regime than India. And they looked down on native engineering. I mean, it says so in the way they looked at the Kallanai. So it's, when you look down on something, you don't respect it, and then you don't understand what purpose it's serving.
So in the book, you also spend some time talking about when your own house ran out of water in 2013. And you kind of talk about how you decided to monitor your water usage. So how did you sort of begin your research into that? How did you know where to look to kind of see what fits ultimately, to see what works and what didn't?
So as I've mentioned in the book, it's a little bit of mistake, one step forward, two step backs, right? And that's what I've said. Like first we thought when we ran out of water there was something wrong with the bore well, right? And the column was muddy, etc. And we went and looked at it. It wasn't there. So it was a little bit of just, and that's change, right? That's the process of change. It's never a straight line as the stories tell it. You're going to bump your nose and get a little bloody from time to time, and that's par for the course. But it's this actually came from my manufacturing background, wherein we won an award called the TPM award given by the Japanese Institute of Plant Engineers, and that emphasizes data, right? The more data, the better. The more granular the data, the better. The more consistent the data, the better. So we said, okay, let's just figure out where are we using the water? We had no clue. I mean, it's amazing how ignorant we were. And I think we were a great representation of how amazingly ignorant most of us are on our water. And that's the point, right? Like as long as water remains invisible to you, it's always going to be a bottleneck. When you recognize India's water, and India's water is very different from water, and that's something I've gone about, that's what the first half of the first two chapters in the book lay. It's geographically varied, and that's something the British canal of, the network of canals and railways helped us forget, that it's so geographically varied, from Jaisalmer, who gets 165 millimeters, to parts in the northeast that get 5 meters of rain, right? It's not a one size fit all. It's so seasonal. It's more seasonal than most countries in the world. We get most of our rainfall in 100 hours. Right? And it varies across years as El Niños and Indian ocean dipoles enter and exit the stage. And so once we recognize this, and once we start acknowledging water and respecting it as we did before, then it ceases to become a bottleneck. Because today we go about our lives quite peacefully because we've learned to manage water. And that's another thing I've tried to emphasize in the book, which is it need not be difficult. It need not be onerous. Right? Once you acknowledge it and you recognize it and you build up systems to support it, it becomes an ally, a powerful ally.
So you also write about water and politics, about how water can get you votes, but water management can cost you politically. So, is that also why you feel parties avoid the topic or don't?
No, parties talk about water all the time. It's just water management that people don't talk about, right? So if what I've actually said is water provision is electorally very powerful, but water management is political suicide. Right? So, and this is not, I've looked at several case studies in the book. So I'll just take one thing, which is the study that our institute did. And I really hope that, others sort of replicate this to see whether this is true everywhere. Right. So when the Chennai water crisis, the 2019, Chennai seems to have a water crisis very often, but this was the 2019 thing when Day Zero sort of came to visit Chennai. So it wasn't just Chennai. Madurai had an equally bad water crisis. So in our institute, we spoke to more than 2,000 households. And this was across a period of 3 years. And then, during the height of the crisis, we asked them, would you vote on water? Is that a factor in your voting? We asked this question to more than 900 people. 600 people gave us an answer, about 600, and most said no. Right? And even those who said yes said, it's again provision. If you give us a water connection, if you give us a sewerage connection, we'll vote for you. But I think there was one gentleman who said, if you desilt the tanks and canals, I will vote for you. Right? So what do you expect political parties to do once they see that, and what case study after case study, which I've written in the book, whether it be Telangana, um, Delhi, Madhya Pradesh, it sort of says, when push comes to elections, water management is going to be given a go by because it doesn't have popular support, right? And that's again, that's where we come back again and again. That's where we come back again and again. That's why decentralized will hopefully work, because in the immediate aftermath of the crisis, the popular support to act is actually at its highest.
At its highest, yeah. You also talk about the importance of conserving forests as because they play such an important role in water distribution. But now with climate change and the climate crisis and lowering emissions, with talk of all of that, there is also this idea of now creating forests, of creating carbon sinks, of mass tree plantations. What effect do you think that could have on our water cycle and our water use and water management?
So one of the reasons I wrote this book is because, all climate conversations center around carbon, but the climate itself speaks through water, right? So one of the reasons for writing this book is water needs to be part of that conversation. And one of forests, in my opinion, the issue of forests and the issue of just thinking about forests has two problems. One of lack of understanding, a lack of complete understanding, and second, the lack of imagination. And let me explain what I mean. I think the nature of the relationship between forests and water is something I've gone into depth in the book, right? Forests are critical towards smoothing India's highly volatile water, right? They bring down floods. They provide base flow. So if you want summer water for the cities, you need to keep forests alive. And there is emerging evidence that they may add to rainfall because of the water evaporating out of their surfaces. They hold back silt. You name it. They're like a magic do-all tool, right? So it's very interesting to think of the link between forests and water and asking exactly the question you asked, which is, will they help, right? And I think it's
not just natural forests.
No, I know you're coming to plantations, and I'm coming to that too. So I think what the evidence says today is pristine, biodiversity, rich in biodiversity kind of forests do a better job in doing these water modulation services than plantations, right? There is another study that says grasslands do a better job than eucalyptus, which is a colonial import again, right? And Kodaikanal is, to me, heaven on earth. And, we have Shola and grassland dotted landscape, which has been sort of colonized with eucalyptus over the time. So it's quite personal. So it's not very clear whether plantations will do as good a role as biodiversity, old world forests, so to speak. But I think what more than anything else you need is more study into this area, right? So we can actually be more precise in how to target this forest, because we've lost a heck of a lot of forest cover, right? So we need to grow it back. So it's a question of what do you use to sort of regrow it back. So there's degraded land becoming, there's so many initiatives going on, many of which I've talked in the book. But there's another thing, right? There's a lack of imagination. Again, colonial hangover. If you look at the valuation of our forests today, I think 60% of the value of the forest lies in the timber value. We haven't moved in over 100 years in how we look at our forests. We're literally missing the forest for the trees. And I think, I think hydrological services provide 3% of forest value. I mean, that just shows there's that lack of understanding, which is translating into how we look at our forests, and therefore what needs to come. So because that is the bottleneck, that is what needs to be addressed first. Then the rest of it will follow.
My last question has to do with this very neat checklist that you made at the end of your book, which sort of tells various stakeholders what they can do to manage water better.
Mm-hmm.
So what, according to you, is sort of the most important step at an individual level that people should and can take to sort of understand better where our water comes from, where it goes, what we can do to make our own contributions to kind of ease the water crisis that we're in?
See water. See it, right? I mean, it's invisible now. And I think, if anything, the reason why that political chapter is there is to show, it's a depressing chapter, right? And it's to show people that ultimately the power is in your hands, right? And because water action is so decentralized, you are responsible for your water. And that's, this is something Rajendra ji and we've always spoken about, right? In ancient India, water was a responsibility, right? It always, it never came for free. You gave shramdan or whatever to get that water. And therefore, it naturally got ingrained that water is your responsibility and you have to build your resilience. Today, we've moved away from that. And, thanks to the British Raj's thing of we will provide water, right? That was the way of selling it to the public, but it was good return on British capital that was the underlying reason. But, we've sort of said, okay, it's something for the government to provide, and we don't have much of a role in it. And if there is one message I'd like people to take away is, India's water is not, it's like a high maintenance relationship. It will give you a lot, but I think you'll have to respect it because it is volatile, and it is your responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
The moment you do that, it just becomes a huge ally. And it doesn't have to be difficult, right? And I think case after case in the study, story after story says, it doesn't need to be difficult, but you do need to acknowledge it.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with us and for taking the time out. The book again is Watershed by Mridula Ramesh. And for more videos like this one, do subscribe to ThePrint.